Look, forget the Sunday school paintings. Jerusalem, late spring, 66 AD. The air? It doesn't smell like frankincense. It smells like damp wool and the copper scream of 5,000 slaughtered lambs roasting in the sun. You're standing in the lower city, and your leather sandals are currently marinating in a pure ritual bath that's actually a thick, stagnant broth of Trichuris tricura, whipworms. Millions of them. We picture these stoic figures in white robes, but underneath, it's a nightmare of abdominal cramps and dysentery. Pure irony. No, scratch that. Just pure, unadulterated filth. Think about the logistics. Seriously. You've got 500,000 pilgrims, maybe more, shoved into a space smaller than a couple of blocks in Midtown Manhattan. And they're all required by divine law to be clean. It's the ultimate cosmic punchline. You're standing at the base of the Temple Mount, the sun hitting the gold leaf so hard it actually hurts your eyes. It's glorious, it's magnificent, and it's a massive, ticking biohazard. History books? They love the word purity, but the archaeology? It's way more disgusting. When we dig into the drainage channels under the Tyropean Valley, wait, let me get the map right. Yeah, right under the main street. We don't just find coins or lost Roman sandals. We find the biological footprint of a population on the brink of total intestinal collapse. The city was basically a funnel. Everything, and I mean everything, washed down from the upper city. The rich guys in their Herodian mansions had their private baths, sure, but that waste? It went south, down to the lower city where you, the average pilgrim, are currently breathing in a fine mist of pulverized donkey dung and dried human waste. The wind picks it up, it settles on your flatbread, it coats the back of your throat. Josephus, that guy loved to exaggerate, but let's look at his numbers, claimed millions gathered for Passover. Even if he's lying by half, the math is still a nightmare. No sewers, not really. No running water in the way you'd expect, just cisterns and the mikvaot. Those ritual baths? They were supposed to wash away spiritual impurity. Instead, they were communal soups of Ascaris lumbricoides, giant round worms, 10 inches long, living in your gut, competing for every scrap of food you managed to swallow. Archaeologists found these parasite eggs in first-century latrines near the city of David. Not just a few. It was a literal infestation. You'd be walking through the corridor, feeling all holy and pious, while a colony of parasites is having a party in your bile duct. It wasn't an exception. It was the baseline. And the smell. God, it wasn't just earthy. It was the concentrated stench of the Hinnom Valley, Gehenna, where the refuse and the dead animals and the things I shouldn't mention just sat. The smoke from the sacrificial altars mixed with the rot. It was thick. It stuck to your hair. You tried to wash it off in the pool of Siloam, but guess what? 500 other guys just washed their dusty, sore-covered feet in that same water. It's a wonder anyone survived long enough to pray. Actually, strike that. Most of them didn't. This wasn't a holy city. It was a slaughterhouse with a really nice view. The blood. It didn't just vanish into the ether because it was holy. During Passover, historians estimate, and yeah, Josephus is probably exaggerating, but the archaeology mostly backs up the scale, that upwards of 250,000 lambs were slaughtered in a week. Think about that volume. A lamb has about 2 liters of blood. Do the math. That's 500,000 liters of warm, sticky, metallic-smelling fluid pouring off the altar. It flowed through a sophisticated, for the time, system of drains that emptied directly into the Kidron Valley. If you were standing down there, looking up at the temple, you weren't seeing a shining beacon of God's glory. You were seeing a red waterfall, a literal river of gore. It didn't just disappear, it sat, it pooled, it fermented in the Judean sun. First-century Jerusalem wasn't just a city, it was a giant open-air petri dish for every blood-borne pathogen known to man. And the flies, my God, the flies. They would have been everywhere, not just your standard houseflies. Big, green, metallic blowflies. Thousands of them, moving in clouds so thick you'd breathe them in if you weren't careful. They'd land on the sacrificial meat, then they'd land on your face, then they'd land on the open sores of the beggars sitting by the beautiful gate. It's a closed loop of infection. You're not just praying, you're participating in a biological exchange program. Wait, I need to check my notes on the Midot. Right. The priests. They worked barefoot, on cold, wet, blood-soaked stone, year-round. They suffered from chronic stomach sickness, the ma'ayim. The temple actually had a dedicated physician, the Ben Ahijah, whose entire job was treating priests for the dysentery they caught from standing in filth while they did God's work. Imagine that. The holiest men in the world, the elite of the elite, spent half their lives doubled over with the cramps because ritual purity didn't cover washing your hands after touching a carcass. Speaking of which, if you're enjoying this descent into the literal gut of history, hit that subscribe button. Or don't. Maybe you prefer the sanitized Sunday school version. But here at the Diary, we like the dirt. It's more honest. Now, let's talk about the mikvaot, the ritual baths. If you're a first-century Jew, you're obsessed with tahara, ritual purity. You touch a dead bird? Unclean. You have a certain kind of rash? Unclean. To fix it, you go into a mikvah. It's a stepped pool carved into the bedrock. It's supposed to be living water, meaning it has to come from a natural source like rain or a spring. Sounds poetic. It's actually a death trap. Archaeologists have found these pools all over the city, near the temple, in private homes, everywhere. The problem is that in the summer, rain doesn't fall. The water stays. It stagnates. It becomes a tepid, green soup of human debris. You've got hundreds of pilgrims, many of them sick, because why else are they coming to the temple if not to seek a cure, stepping into the same pool of water. They've walked 50 miles from Galilee. Their feet are cracked. They've got fungal infections. They've got parasites. They dip. They come out pure. But biologically, they just coated themselves in a biofilm of every soul who dipped before them. Recent excavations in the city of David found a massive concentration of Trichuris trichiura, whipworm, and Ascaris lumbricoides, roundworm, eggs in the sediment of these areas. These aren't just germs. These are worms that grow inside you, migrate through your lungs, and then settle in your intestines to suck your blood. And the mikveh was the distribution center. The upper city was better, sure. The elites, the high priests, the guys living in the mansions with the mosaics, they had private mikvaot. But even they weren't safe. You can't wall off a parasite. It travels on the back of the slave who brings you your wine. It travels in the dust that blows off the lower city. And let's be real about the medicine of the time. If you got sick in first century Jerusalem, you weren't getting antibiotics. You were getting a poultice of pigeon dung, or maybe some crushed up beetles if the doctor was feeling fancy. There's a record in the Jerusalem Talmud, well, it's a bit later, but the science hadn't changed, that suggests treating a certain type of fever by sitting at a crossroads and grabbing the first ant you see that's carrying something. You put the ant in a copper tube and shake it. Yeah, that'll definitely stop the sepsis from that scratch on your leg. The physical reality of the city was one of constant, grinding abrasion. Everything was stone. Everything was dust. The limestone of Jerusalem is beautiful, but when it's ground down by a million sandals, it becomes a fine, caustic powder. It gets in your eyes. It causes chronic conjunctivitis. Look at any crowd in the ancient Near East, and half of them would have had red, weeping eyes. It wasn't mysterious or biblical. It was just dirt. And the water supply, man, the water. Most of Jerusalem's water came from the Gihon Spring. It's an intermittent spring, which means it gushes out a few times a day and then stops. The city built tunnels, Hezekiah's Tunnel, the Siloam Channel, to bring that water inside the walls. But once it's inside, it goes into cisterns, deep, dark, humid holes in the ground. I've been in those cisterns. They're cool, which is nice when it's 105 degrees outside. But they're also perfect breeding grounds for mosquitoes. Malaria wasn't just a swamp disease, it was an urban one. You're sleeping on your roof to catch a breeze, and you're being eaten alive by Anopheles mosquitoes that just hatched in the water you're going to drink tomorrow morning. You're tired. You're malnourished because a third of your calories are going to the tapeworm you picked up at the last festival. Your immune system is basically a white flag at this point. And then you decide to go to the Pool of Bethesda. You've heard it's a place of healing. You see the 5 porches. You see the crowds of the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. It sounds like a hospital. It wasn't. It was a stagnant reservoir where people literally waited for the water to stir, which was probably just a subterranean spring bubbling up, or, worse, gases from decomposing organic matter at the bottom. You're lying there, shoulder to shoulder with people who have open, suppurating sores, respiratory infections, and probably the plague. You're all waiting to jump into the same hole of water. If you weren't sick when you arrived at Bethesda, you were definitely sick when you left. The sheer density of the population during the festivals was the final nail in the coffin. Jerusalem was built for maybe 30,000 to 50,000 people. During Passover, that number exploded. People were camping on roofs, in the streets, in the valleys. There was no sanitation department. There was no one coming around to pick up the trash. You'd be walking to the temple, trying to feel that spiritual connection, and you're literally stepping over piles of refuse that have been there for 3 weeks. The smell of the tanning industry, which had to be located outside the city because it involved soaking hides in urine and dog feces, would waft in when the wind shifted. It was a sensory assault. It was a biological minefield. We look at the Herodian stones, those massive, perfectly carved blocks, and we see greatness. We see a golden age. But if you could actually stand there, in the middle of the Tyropoeon Valley in the year 30 AD, you wouldn't be thinking about the architecture. You'd be trying not to vomit. You'd be looking for a way out. But there was no way out. The city was a trap. A high-walled, stone-paved trap where the holy and the horrific were so tightly wound together, you couldn't tell where the sacrifice ended and the infection began. Wait, did I mention the dogs? The packs of semi-feral dogs that roamed the Hinnom Valley? They were the real cleanup crew. They ate the things the priests threw away. They were the only thing keeping the city from being buried under its own weight in offal. And we wonder why the ancient world was so obsessed with purity. It wasn't some abstract theological concept. It was a desperate, failed attempt to survive a world that was trying to rot them from the inside out. They weren't unhygienic because they were lazy. They were unhygienic because they were overwhelmed. They were fighting a war against the microscopic with a copper tube and a shaken ant. And they were losing every single day. Stop. Just stop. Suddenly, it's not a history lesson. It's a countdown. April 14th, 33 AD. High noon. The sun is a hammer, and the city is the anvil. You're standing in the lower city, near the Tyropean Valley. You think you're breathing air? Wrong. You're breathing dust. Fecal dust. Dried, pulverized waste kicked up by 10,000 sandals. It coats your tongue. It's gritty. It tastes like copper and old rot. Wait, something is wrong. Your stomach. It doesn't just hurt, it screams. A sharp, twisting agony right under your ribs. It's the kind of pain that makes your vision go gray at the edges. You need water. Now. The Siloam pool is right there. Beautiful, right? Ancient stone steps, shimmering surface, sacred. Look closer. There's a film on the water, an oily, iridescent slick. A man with skin like yellow parchment is rinsing a bloody rag in the corner. A child is drinking from his hands just 3 feet away. You're desperate. You're modern. You think, it's just water, I'll be fine. You take a sip. Mistake. Massive, catastrophic mistake. Within seconds, your world narrows to a single point of heat. This is the turn. This is where the golden age reveals its teeth. You aren't a tourist anymore. You're a host. A host for the ascaris, the roundworms. They're already waking up in your gut. They're swimming through your bile ducts. You feel a tickle in the back of your throat. You cough. You expect phlegm. You get a 4-inch, pale white worm wriggling on your palm. And there is no doctor. There is no Z-Pack. There is only a priest 3 blocks away telling a crowd that sickness is a lack of purity, that you're unclean, that you can't enter the temple because your body is failing you. You're dying in the holiest place on earth, and the smell of incense is trying and failing to cover the scent of your own dissolving insides. Hear that? That low, constant hum? It's not the crowd. It's the wings. Trillions of metallic green flies. They've been waiting for you to drop. They've been waiting since the foundation of the world. You're not a survivor. You're fertilizer for the Hinnom Valley. Move, run. But where? Every door is a wall. Every alley is a sewer. Herod's greatness is just a very expensive tomb, and you just walked right into the sarcophagus. God, the heat. It's so loud. Why is the heat so loud? My head hurts just thinking about the flies. Anyway, you're still here? Tough gut. Most people would have clicked away the second I mentioned the worms wriggling in your throat. Tell me, where next? If I have to sift through more historical filth, I want you to pick the flavor of the grime. Victorian London? The fragrant streets of Edo? Or maybe a crusader camp where the water tastes like rusted iron and dysentery? Drop it in the comments. I read them. Most of them. Hit the button. Subscribe. Or don't. I'm just here recording the decay. It's April 14th, and the sun is too bright for this much talk about bile. Stay clean, if you can.